All right, let's talk about Israel. And to do that, you have to start with a map, a pen, and a group of diplomats in 1947 who, with the very best of intentions, drew a line in the sand that would set off a political earthquake we're still feeling today. Before 1948, the land was known as British Mandate Palestine, a territory Britain had been looking after since the Ottoman Empire decided to join the wrong team in World War I. After World War II, a devastated global Jewish community, haunted by the horrors of the Holocaust, desperately sought a safe homeland. The United Nations, a brand new organization hoping to prevent future catastrophes, stepped in with what seemed like a reasonable solution, the partition plan. The idea was simple, at least on paper. The UN would take the land of Palestine and slice it into two states, one for Jews and one for Arabs, with the holy city of Jerusalem being managed by an international body, like a global landlord. The Jewish leadership, eager for a state of their own after centuries of persecution, accepted the plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was a state. However, the Arab leaders and the majority Arab population living there looked at the proposal and said, absolutely not. They saw it as a colonial project, giving a large portion of their land to a minority population, much of which had arrived in recent decades. It was a fundamental disagreement with no easy middle ground. So, you had a plan that one side accepted and the other side vehemently rejected. This is the political equivalent of one person joyfully signing a lease for a new apartment, while the person already living there is screaming, "I didn't agree to move out." The tension that had been simmering for years under British rule was about to boil over. Britain, for its part, was exhausted from the war and eager to wash its hands of the whole messy situation. They announced they were leaving in May 1948, essentially packing their bags, turning off the lights, and leaving two groups with irreconcilable goals to figure it out for themselves in a very small, very important piece of real estate. This set the stage for immediate conflict. Think of it as the ultimate international, she said, but with armies and borders on the line. The UN plan was a blueprint for a two-state solution, a phrase we still hear constantly today, but it was a blueprint that was immediately thrown into the shredder of reality. The moment the British packed up their last teacups and sailed away, the dream of a peaceful two-state partition died, and the fight for the land itself began in earnest. The lines drawn on the UN's map were about to be redrawn, not with a pen, but with gunpowder and blood. On May 14, 1948, as the British mandate officially expired, David Ben-Gurion stood up and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. For Jewish people around the world, this was a moment of profound historic triumph, the realization of a 2,000-year-old dream, a sovereign nation, a safe haven. But a celebration for one group was the beginning of a nightmare for another. The very next day, armies from 5 neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded, determined to crush the newborn state. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War had begun, and the future of the entire region hung in the balance. When the fighting finally stopped in 1949, the result was a stunning Israeli victory. Not only had Israel survived, but it had also expanded its territory far beyond the borders proposed by the UN partition plan. Israel now controlled about 78% of what had been British Mandate Palestine. The proposed Arab state never came to be. Instead, the remaining territories, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, were occupied by Jordan, and the Gaza Strip was controlled by Egypt. The neat lines of the UN map were gone, replaced by a messy, jagged new reality forged in war. Israel was now a fact on the ground, larger and more powerful than anyone had expected. For Palestinians, this period is known as the Nakba, which translates to the catastrophe. It was, and remains, the single most traumatic event in their collective history. During the war, more than 700,000 Palestinians, roughly half the Arab population of Palestine, either fled or were expelled from their homes in the territory that became Israel. They ended up in refugee camps in neighboring Arab countries, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, expecting to return home once the fighting was over. They never did. Their villages were destroyed or repopulated, and their land was gone. This created a massive permanent refugee crisis that is still at the heart of the conflict today. The consequence of this war was the creation of two starkly different narratives. For Israelis, it was the War of Independence, a heroic struggle for survival against overwhelming odds. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, a story of dispossession, loss, and exile. Both of these stories are true for the people who experienced them, and they run on parallel tracks that almost never intersect. The land that one group now called home was the same land another group had just been forced to leave. This fundamental, unresolved tragedy of 1948 is the poisoned well from which nearly every subsequent conflict in the region has been drawn. From the very moment Israel declared its independence, it had a powerful friend in its corner, the United States. And a key part of that early friendship was mobilized by American Jews. Having witnessed the world stand by during the Holocaust, the American Jewish community was galvanized into action. They weren't just sending well wishes, they were organizing, fundraising, and lobbying with ferocious intensity. President Harry S. Truman formally recognized the new state of Israel just 11 minutes after its creation, a decision heavily influenced by this powerful domestic political pressure. This early support was absolutely critical. The help wasn't just diplomatic. In the precarious early days, financial support from American Jewish communities was a lifeline. They raised enormous sums of money, which were used for everything from purchasing weapons needed to fight the 1948 war to helping the new state absorb hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors who were pouring in from Europe and the Middle East. This was more than just charity. It was a nation-building project funded in large part from across the Atlantic. It created a deep, foundational bond between Israel and the American Jewish diaspora, who saw Israel's survival as intrinsically linked to their own. As the decades passed, this relationship evolved from one of community support to a strategic alliance between governments. The U.S. government itself became Israel's most important partner, providing billions of dollars in military and economic aid every year. This aid helped Israel build one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the world. It's a unique relationship. No other country receives the same level of consistent, unconditional support from Washington. This alliance is rooted in shared democratic values, but also in cold, hard strategic interests, as the U.S. came to see Israel as a stable, reliable ally in a very unstable part of the world. This rock-solid support has had enormous consequences on the world stage, especially at the United Nations. Time and time again, when the UN Security Council has tried to pass resolutions critical of Israeli actions, whether it's condemning settlement expansion or calling for a ceasefire in a conflict, the United States has used its veto power to block them. As recently as June 2025, a U.S. veto shielded Israel from a ceasefire demand. This diplomatic Iron Dome means that Israel is largely insulated from international pressure, able to pursue policies that much of the world condemns without facing any serious repercussions from the planet's most powerful institutions. It's a friendship that has defined the conflict as much as any war. If 1948 created Israel, the Six-Day War of 1967 redefined it. In the spring of 1967, tensions were sky-high. Egypt's leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, a move Israel considered an act of war, and amassed troops in the Sinai Peninsula. Fearing an imminent, coordinated attack from its Arab neighbors, Israel decided to strike first. On June 5, 1967, the Israeli Air Force launched a surprise attack that decimated the air forces of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria while they were still on the ground. It was a devastatingly effective opening move that decided the outcome of the war before it had barely begun. The war that followed was shockingly brief and brutally decisive. In just 6 days, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, achieved a victory that stunned the world and redrew the map of the Middle East. From Egypt, Israel captured the entire Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip. From Jordan, it took the West Bank and, crucially, all of East Jerusalem, including the Old City with its holy sites. And from Syria, it seized the strategic high ground of the Golan Heights. In less than a week, Israel had more than tripled the territory under its control, transforming from a small, vulnerable-seeming nation into the region's dominant military power. This victory brought with it a whole new set of problems. With the newly captured territories came over 1 million Palestinians who were now living under Israeli military occupation. This wasn't like 1948. The people didn't leave. They stayed. Suddenly, Israel was responsible for governing a large, hostile population that did not want to be ruled by them. This began the ongoing military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, a situation that international law views as temporary, but has now lasted for over half a century. The question of what to do with this land, and the people living on it, has been the central, agonizing dilemma of Israeli politics ever since. The 1967 war was a moment of euphoria for Israelis, who saw it as a miracle. They had not only survived another existential threat, but had also reunified Jerusalem, a moment of immense religious and cultural significance. But for the Arab world, it was a humiliating defeat, and for Palestinians, it marked the start of a new, grinding chapter of life under military rule. The acquisition of these territories, known as the Occupied Territories, set the stage for the next 50-plus years of conflict, centered on Israeli settlement building, Palestinian resistance, and the seemingly endless, fruitless search for a land for peace formula that has yet to materialize. After the 1967 war, a powerful movement emerged within Israel to build Jewish communities or settlements in the newly occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza. For some, this was driven by a religious belief that this land, known biblically as Judea and Samaria, was promised to the Jewish people by God. For others, it was a strategic move to establish facts on the ground, making it impossible to ever give the land back, and creating a security buffer for Israel proper. Whatever the motivation, successive Israeli governments supported and funded the construction of these settlements, which are considered illegal under international law, because they violate the Geneva Convention's prohibition on an occupying power transferring its own population into occupied territory. As the settlements grew, they began to carve up the West Bank into a patchwork of disconnected Palestinian enclaves. Imagine trying to bake a cake, but someone keeps dropping marbles into the batter. The cake can't hold together. Israeli settlements and the network of settler-only roads, military checkpoints, and security zones that connect them have had the same effect on Palestinian territory. They have made the creation of a viable, contiguous Palestinian state, the cornerstone of the two-state solution, look less like a political possibility and more like a geographic impossibility. The land that was supposed to be for a future Palestine was being eaten away, piece by piece. The physical division became even more pronounced in the early 2000s when Israel began constructing the West Bank barrier, a massive wall of concrete slabs and high-tech fences. Israel says the barrier is purely for security, built to stop Palestinian suicide bombers who had been attacking Israeli cities during the Second Intifada. And it's true, the attacks did drop dramatically, but the barrier wasn't built along the 1967 border, the Green Line. Instead, it snakes deep into the West Bank, effectively annexing about 10% of the territory, including major settlement blocks, and separating Palestinian farmers from their land and villages from each other. For Palestinians, it's not a security fence, it's an apartheid wall. This constant expansion has created a one-state reality with two separate and unequal systems. In the same territory of the West Bank, Israeli settlers live under Israeli civil law, enjoying all the rights of Israeli citizens. Just down the road, their Palestinian neighbors live under Israeli military law, with their movement restricted and their political and civil rights severely curtailed. This stark division has led to increasing accusations from international human rights groups, and even some Israeli ones, that the situation amounts to a system of apartheid. The horizon for an independent Palestinian state has visibly shrunk, replaced by a landscape of walls, checkpoints, and permanent occupation. Israel's story cannot be told without talking about its military, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF. Forged in the fires of the 1948 war, the IDF has become one of the most powerful and technologically sophisticated armies on the planet. Its strength is built on a foundation of compulsory military service. Most Jewish Israelis are required to serve, creating a society where military experience is a shared, near-universal rite of passage. This constant flow of personnel, combined with massive, sustained investment in military technology and billions of dollars in annual aid from the United States, has given Israel a decisive military edge over any combination of its neighbors. This military prowess is on full display in its Air Force, intelligence agencies like Mossad, and its pioneering work in cyber warfare. Israel is a world leader in developing military hardware, from the Iron Dome missile defense system, which can intercept short-range rockets, to advanced drones and surveillance technology. This focus on military strength comes from a core belief held by many Israelis, often summarized as the Masada complex, a conviction that they are alone in a hostile world and can only rely on themselves for survival. Every war, from 1948 to the present day, has reinforced this doctrine of self-reliance and the necessity of overwhelming force. But the most powerful weapon in Israel's arsenal is the one it officially refuses to talk about. It is the world's worst-kept secret. Israel has nuclear weapons. While Israeli leaders have never confirmed or denied their existence, maintaining a policy of nuclear ambiguity, it is universally accepted that Israel developed a nuclear arsenal decades ago, likely with French assistance. Estimates suggest Israel possesses somewhere between 80 and 200 nuclear warheads, which can be delivered by aircraft, submarines, and ballistic missiles. This gives Israel what is known as the Samson option, the ability to inflict devastating retaliation if its own existence is ever truly threatened. This undeclared nuclear status has profoundly shaped the region's power dynamics. It creates a massive deterrent, ensuring that no state actor would dare launch a full-scale invasion aimed at destroying Israel for fear of annihilation. However, it also fuels a regional arms race, particularly with Iran, which sees Israel's nuclear capability as a justification for pursuing its own. Israel's secret in the basement is the ultimate insurance policy, but it's one that keeps the entire neighborhood on a permanent knife's edge, where one miscalculation could lead to an unimaginable catastrophe. Israel's relationships with its neighbors have always been, to put it mildly, complicated. For decades, it was surrounded by a wall of solid hostility, but over time, cracks began to appear in that wall. The first major breakthrough came in 1979, when Egypt, under President Anwar Sadat, signed a historic peace treaty with Israel. In exchange for peace and full diplomatic relations, Israel returned the entire Sinai Peninsula, which it had captured in 1967. This was a monumental shift. The largest and most powerful Arab country had officially made peace with the Jewish state, a move that got Sadat a Nobel Peace Prize and, tragically, an assassin's bullet. A second major peace deal followed in 1994 with Jordan. This treaty was less dramatic but equally important, as it secured Israel's longest border and formalized decades of quiet, behind-the-scenes cooperation on security and water. These two treaties with Egypt and Jordan have been the cornerstones of Israel's regional security for decades. They are often described as a cold peace, based more on shared strategic interests, like countering radical groups in Iran, than on any warm feelings between their populations. But they have held, proving that peace, even a chilly one, is possible. Beyond these two treaties, however, the neighborhood remains largely hostile. To the north, Israel is in a state of perpetual conflict with Syria and Lebanon. Syria has never forgiven Israel for occupying the Golan Heights, and the two countries remain bitter enemies. Lebanon is home to Hezbollah, a powerful Iran-backed militant group that fought a devastating war with Israel in 2006, and possesses a massive arsenal of rockets aimed at Israeli cities. The northern border is a constant source of tension, a tripwire for a potential major regional war that could erupt at any moment. But Israel's primary adversary today isn't a country on its border, it's Iran. The two countries were once allies, but since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran has become Israel's arch-nemesis, ideologically committed to its destruction. Iran funds, trains, and arms anti-Israel militant groups across the region, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, in what Israel calls a ring of fire. This rivalry is a shadow war fought through proxies, cyber attacks, and assassinations, with the constant, terrifying possibility that Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons could one day lead to a direct, catastrophic confrontation. Israel's relationship with Palestinian factions has often been a complex dance of strategic calculations, with a long history of playing different groups against each other. It's a controversial topic, but there are credible claims that in the 1980s, Israel initially tolerated and even indirectly supported the rise of Islamist movements in Gaza, including the precursor to Hamas. The logic, according to critics, was to divide and conquer. By allowing an Islamist alternative to grow, Israel hoped to weaken the secular nationalist Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, which was then considered Israel's main enemy. The idea was that a divided Palestinian leadership would be easier to manage than a united one. Whether it was a deliberate strategy or a case of unintended consequences, the result was the same. Hamas grew into a powerful political and military force, eventually becoming the PLO's most significant rival. This internal Palestinian division has been a major obstacle to peace, allowing Israel to argue that it has no partner for peace since the Palestinian leadership is split between the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and the Hamas government in Gaza. This dynamic has, for years, served the interests of Israeli hardliners who oppose a two-state solution, as a divided Palestinian House cannot effectively negotiate for a state. This strategy of using local proxies appears to have continued in more recent and more overt forms. In a stunning admission in June 2025, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that Israel was actively arming and backing local armed gangs and powerful clans in Gaza. The stated goal was to create rivals to Hamas on the ground and to have these groups help manage the distribution of humanitarian aid. However, this policy has been met with severe criticism even from within Israel's security establishment. Critics warn that it's a dangerous game putting Israeli weapons into the hands of criminal organizations who are just as likely to turn on Israeli forces as they are to fight Hamas. The immediate consequences of this policy have been alarming. International aid organizations have accused these Israeli-backed armed groups of stealing desperately needed humanitarian supplies and selling them on the black market, exacerbating the catastrophic hunger crisis in Gaza. Instead of creating a stable alternative to Hamas, the policy risks plunging parts of Gaza into lawless chaos, ruled by warlords and gangs. It's a modern-day example of a classic counterinsurgency tactic that often backfires, creating more problems than it solves, and demonstrating a cynical willingness to foster chaos in order to achieve a narrow, short-term security goal. The cycle of violence reached a terrifying new peak on October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel, killing around 1,200 people and taking some 250 hostages. It was the deadliest day in Israel's history and a profound national trauma. Israel's response was swift and ferocious, a declaration of war on Hamas and the launch of a military campaign in Gaza of unprecedented scale and intensity. The stated goal was to destroy Hamas and rescue the hostages. The result has been the utter devastation of the Gaza Strip and a staggering loss of Palestinian life. By June of 2025, after more than a year and a half of relentless bombardment and ground operations, the Palestinian death toll in Gaza had climbed past 54,000, with over 125,000 wounded, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The sheer scale of the destruction has been breathtaking, with UN investigations finding that nearly all of Gaza's schools and a majority of its cultural and religious sites have been damaged or destroyed. In a scathing June 2025 report, a UN commission described Israel's actions as constituting war crimes and crimes against humanity, including the use of starvation as a weapon of war and the intentional targeting of civilian infrastructure. Despite these grave accusations from the world's highest legal and human rights bodies, Israel has faced virtually no concrete international punishment. The reason can be summed up in one word: veto. The United States has consistently used its power as a permanent member of the UN Security Council to shield Israel from accountability. When the Council tries to pass resolutions demanding a ceasefire, condemning Israeli military actions, or enforcing international law, the US steps in to block it. This diplomatic protection means that UN resolutions against Israel are often toothless, and rulings from bodies like the International Court of Justice, which is hearing a genocide case against Israel, are difficult to enforce. This is why the conflict endures. It's a vicious cycle fueled by unresolved historical grievances and a profound power imbalance. For Palestinians, it's a fight against what they see as a brutal, decades-long occupation and dispossession, now culminating in what UN experts call a war of annihilation. For many Israelis, it is a perpetual war for survival against enemies sworn to their destruction, where any sign of weakness could be fatal. With no accountability for actions that violate international law, and with a political dynamic that rewards extremism on both sides, there is little incentive for compromise. Peace remains a distant dream, buried under layers of history, trauma, and the grim reality that, without a fundamental change in the status quo, the violence is destined to continue.